Well, London's mayor is in Brussels right now discussing the terror attack. On a 3-day visit, where he'll also go to Paris, Sadiq Khan says despite Brexit, it's now more important than ever for the UK and its neighbours to cooperate on matters of security and strengthen bonds to fight homegrown terrorism. Our political correspondent, Simon Harris, is with him and sent this report.
When terrorists strike in London, the response is more armed police. In Brussels, they turn out the army. Soldiers with automatic weapons have become a familiar sight on the streets. London's mayor was greeted by this increased military presence when he arrived at the start of a 3-day trip to Europe. The theme of the mayor's European tour was meant to be Brexit. He was planning to visit 5 cities. But in the wake of Westminster, that's been cut to 2, and security is now high on the agenda. In March 2016, Brussels was the target of a deadly terrorist attack when 2 suicide bombers blew themselves up at the city's main airport. A short time later, there was another explosion on the metro. 32 innocent people died, more than 300 were injured.
The reality is terrorists want to attack our shared values, want to attack our shared way of life, and so it's great to see our friends across Europe sending a message of solidarity to me and to the government. It'll be crucial over the coming period to make sure that we keep the close cooperation we've got so we can continue to work together to defeat terrorism.
Cross-border cooperation on counter-terrorism has improved in recent years as first Al-Qaeda and now Islamic State targeted yet more European countries. But some Remainers are worried Brexit could damage that. Jean Lambert, one of London's MEPs, says Britain currently plays a leading role.
It's going to be difficult, however, if we're outside the European Union, 1, to have that leading role, and 2, to also know what sort of cooperation we'll be able to have within the European Union itself.
Events in London have skewed the focus of the mayor's trip to Brussels. But Sadiq Khan will be hoping security doesn't drown out his other messages to Europe about a post-Brexit London. Simon Harris, ITV News, Brussels.
Simon, how have those messages been going down so far then?
Well, Nina, hasn't gone exactly to plan because the mayor's principal meeting today was with Donald Tusk here in Brussels. But Mr Tusk, who's the chairman, the president of the EU Council, which is the body which represents prime ministers and presidents, suddenly at the last minute called it off, although City Hall officials hope it can be rearranged for tomorrow. But the mayor has just had a meeting here at the European Commission with a man called Sir Julian King, who's the EU Commissioner for Security. And afterwards, I asked the mayor what his message was.
The important message from the EU Security Commissioner is that the relationship the UK, London has with the EU has to carry on even though we may leave the EU very shortly.
Well, tomorrow there's a whole series of meetings here in Brussels with Mr Tusk. The mayor is hoping also with Guy Verhofstadt, who is the MEP in charge of Brexit for the EU, and with Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the EU Commission. And after that, Sadiq Khan travels to Paris.
Simon Harris, thank you.
On the eve of the historic moment when Britain begins its slow divorce from the European Union, the mayor made a plea on behalf of London to Europe's political leaders: don't punish us. Sadiq Khan laid down the gauntlet in Brussels, saying London is the undisputed financial capital and that any Brexit deal which damaged the city and its jobs would end up damaging Europe itself. Our political correspondent Simon Harris sent this from Brussels.
You have everything what is necessary?
Brussels politics survives, possibly thrives on formality and protocol. For Sadiq Khan, that meant a succession of handshakes and photo calls. But behind the smiles at these grip and grin sessions was a blunt warning from London's mayor. If the EU punishes the UK for leaving, Europe will suffer.
There's no need, as some have suggested, for the EU to send a message or to instil fear by punishing the UK. My city is not only the beating heart of Britain's economy, but the single most important organ for growth across Europe. I say this with friendship and with all due respect, but a bad Brexit deal that hurts London would hurt the European Union too.
The mayor said if a bad Brexit deal forces banks and finance firms to leave London, they won't relocate to Europe, but to America and the Far East. This was Sadiq Khan throwing down a Brexit gauntlet to the EU. But it's a high-risk strategy which could backfire.
How are you, Sadiq
Hello.
Khan? Pleasure to see you. How are you, sir?
Guy Verhofstadt is the MEP who will lead negotiations with the UK on behalf of the European Parliament. He was asked if Britain would be punished.
Not at all, not at all.
But the President of the European Parliament was equally clear. The EU would look after its own.
The Parliament will ensure that the interests of our citizens will be protected. It should be clear that to be a member cannot be the same thing as not being one.
And that was echoed by a leading German MEP.
We will have not the interest of the City of London in mind. We will have the interest of our business and of our community.
The Mayor's final meeting in Brussels was with the all-powerful President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker.
The good news is there's no desire at all for the EU to punish the UK as a consequence of our...
You believe them?
I do. They want to negotiate in good faith. They want the negotiations to be warm and friendly. They're heartbroken that we're leaving the EU.
After 24 hours in Brussels, the Mayor headed for Paris tonight to mark the moment Britain's exit from the EU formally begins. Simon Harris, ITV News, Brussels.
To today's other big story now, the day Britain really began Brexit. It is no coincidence that Sadiq Khan is on the continent for this key moment in the UK's history, the day Article 50 was triggered. Today he's in Paris, where he told our political correspondent Simon Harris he is demanding privileged access to the single market for London. But will the city's mayor really be able to swing a special deal for the capital when the country quits the EU?
One has been talked about as a possible future Prime Minister. The other could very well be the next President of France. Today, Sadiq Khan had an unexpected meeting with Emmanuel Macron at his campaign headquarters in Paris. Politically, they share much in common, but Monsieur Macron wasn't offering London any Brexit favours.
My priority will be to protect the European Union, the interest of the European Union and the interest of the European citizen. And my deep wish is to have Great Britain with the European Union, even in another relationship.
On the other side of the Channel, Theresa May finally set the Brexit ball rolling.
The Article 50 process is now underway, and in accordance with the wishes of the British people, the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union.
The Prime Minister has made it clear unrestricted immigration is too high a price to pay for staying in the single market. But that horrifies the Mayor, who thinks London should be a special case.
In my view, we need to have privileged access to a single market so we can sell our goods but also our services.
That's not realistic, is it?
It's going to be difficult, but it's possible. The EU recognises that for the EU to thrive and flourish, they need London. Look,
Theresa May is not going to allow access to the single market.
Well, Theresa May and the government need to recognise that London is the engine of our country.
Across the rooftops from where the Mayor was standing is the Paris equivalent of Canary Wharf, the financial district of La Défense. Some here have a different take on Brexit, seeing it as an opportunity. Tired of the fog? Try the frogs was just one not very subtle advertising poster aimed at attracting, if not stealing, jobs and businesses. But when London's Mayor joined his Paris counterpart for a conference on pollution, she was eager to play down post-Brexit rivalry.
Ne gagne jamais rien en pensant qu'on va écraser les autres.
We never win by crushing the others, was her conciliatory take. Britain's decision is headline news here. One paper proclaimed, Brexit, we miss you already.
Simon, has he any chance of getting a special deal for the capital?
Nina, the Mayor's argument is that London needs to attract talent from cities like this, and the EU has allowed that to happen. We're regularly reminded that London is, in fact, the 6th biggest French city with 300,000 French nationals living there. The Mayor and business leaders would like to see a system of London-only work permits, but there's really no enthusiasm from ministers for that. And when I spoke to the Prime Minister and asked her about it last year, she made it clear that any future rules on work permits, migration and the single market would have to apply to the whole of the UK.
Sadiq Khan himself is heading back to the capital now. What is your assessment in general of how his mini tour of Europe has gone this week?
Well, he certainly met a lot of influential EU officials in Brussels. He certainly made the case that any deal which harms London will harm Europe. But at the end of the day, the mayor has no role in the Brexit negotiations. That's for ministers. I suspect the greatest prize might be that he's just met and established a working relationship with the man who's likely to be the next president of France.
Simon Harris in Paris, thank you.
When Ken Livingstone toured TV studios last year, making controversial comments about Hitler, he was suspended from the Labour Party. Well, today, the former mayor of London faced a misconduct hearing that could see him thrown out of the party. So, was he in an apologetic mood? Far from it. In fact, as our political correspondent Simon Harris now reports, he couldn't help but talk about the Nazis.
I didn't express my views, I simply repeated historical fact. There's a huge degree of collaboration. Adolf Eichmann was in charge of doing the deal about selling Mauser weapons to the underground Zionist army.
Are you going to apologise?
Apologise for what? I never said Hitler was a Zionist.
He faces expulsion from the party he loves, but today Ken Livingstone was sticking to his controversial and to many people offensive account of Nazi history.
You're a lying racist.
Really? Why didn't you go and
a
check
Nazi
history?
apologist. A Nazi apologist.
It all began to unravel for London's former mayor a year ago when he was challenged by a furious Labour MP about a radio interview.
When Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism.
Mr. Livingstone continues, even today, even in the midst of his expulsion hearing, to sprinkle around the language of the Holocaust like some kind of political confetti, despite the fact that he can be in no doubt about the amount of hurt, anguish and pain this causes to British Jews and Holocaust survivors.
Livingstone isn't going without a fight. He's calling witnesses to give evidence, among them Walter Wolfgang, a 93-year-old anti-war campaigner. In 2005, Mr. Wolfgang was manhandled out of a Labour conference for heckling during a speech on the Iraq War. The tribunal is being held behind closed doors. Outrageous and unfair was Ken Livingstone's verdict on that. After listening to the case against him for 2 hours, he emerged briefly to say it was twisted and distorted. Livingstone believes he's the victim of a smear campaign by MPs on the right of the Labour Party.
These are outrageous lies. If I'd said something like that, I wouldn't just apologise, I'd retire from public life completely.
Are you expected to get a fair hearing?
No.
Not for the first time, Ken Livingstone is ignoring conventional wisdom. When you're in a hole, stop digging.
Wow, what next for Ken Livingstone, Simon?
Well, Charlene, we expect to hear the outcome of the disciplinary hearing sometime tomorrow. And if Ken Livingstone is found guilty of bringing the party into disrepute, as he seems to expect, I can't see any way back for him. He's almost certainly going to be thrown out of the Labour Party. I'm sure he'd like to be remembered as the first directly elected mayor of London, the politician who was brave enough to introduce the congestion charge. But the truth is, he's going to be remembered as the politician who antagonised London's Jewish community and refused to apologise. And I don't think even his close friend and ally, Jeremy Corbyn's going to be able to rescue him from that.
OK, Simon, thanks very much.
Ken Livingstone is still a member of the Labour Party this evening, but for how much longer is anyone's guess. The former London mayor said today he's hopeful he won't be expelled over his controversial claim that Adolf Hitler supported the creation of a Jewish state. The veteran left-winger has been giving his side of the story at a two-day hearing behind closed doors at the party's National Constitutional Committee. Well, our political correspondent Simon Harris is outside the hearing in Westminster. Simon, are we expecting a verdict this evening?
Lucrezia, we were, and as far as we know, the Labour Party disciplinary tribunal inside the Church House Convention Centre here in Westminster is still in session. We're not actually allowed in, but earlier this afternoon, Ken Livingstone texted me to say he was about to start giving his evidence. He's being represented by one of Britain's top criminal barristers, Michael Mansfield QC, but he would also expect to be cross-examined by the Labour Party's lawyer, and maybe that's why it's taking so long. 24 hours ago, he claimed the case against him was twisted and distorted, the disciplinary hearing outrageous and unfair. Today, Ken Livingstone changed his tune. It was fair, but he wasn't prepared to predict the outcome.
How do I know? You know, although, you know, I ran London for 8 years, it didn't give me the chance to be able to predict the future.
Livingstone was accused of bringing the Labour Party into disrepute when he said this in a radio interview last year.
When Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism.
That sparked an extraordinary public row with Labour MP John Mann.
Yes, you're a lying racist.
Kenneth Robert Livingstone.
Livingstone revels in the reputation of political bruiser. He was leader of the Greater London Council when he hosted Irish Republicans, infuriating Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. His left-wing anti-nuclear agenda wound her up even more. She retaliated by abolishing the GLC. He was a Labour MP when he decided to run for London Mayor, but the party chose another candidate. Livingstone stood anyway as an independent and won. Labour threw him out.
I believe passionately, I may be wrong, but this is my genuine belief, that he would be a disaster for London.
Tony Blair would later concede he was wrong. The mayor was readmitted to Labour, but trouble was never far away. And in 2005, Livingstone was involved in a notorious exchange with Oliver Feingold, a Jewish reporter.
What did you do before? Were you a German war criminal?
No, I'm Jewish. I wasn't a German war criminal.
Right. Actually, you are just like concentration camp guards. You're just doing it because you're paid to, aren't you?
He survived an attempt by his rivals to have him suspended from City Hall. And now he thinks his luck could hold again.
For the first time, I'm beginning to think I might actually not be expelled. I mean, it is just amazing how they've retracted from all the allegations that were being made 11 months ago.
So, Simon, Ken Livingstone downbeat yesterday. What's giving him grounds for optimism today?
Well, Lucrezia, remember, we only have his account of what's going on in there. But he says he never said Hitler was a Zionist, just that he supported Zionism, and now says the tribunal has accepted his version of events. He produced 5 witnesses who say he was right, he was historically accurate. He also says the tribunal has accepted that he was not anti-Semitic. But he has been accused of bringing the party into disrepute, he says, because of the timing of his remarks just before the local elections last year. Well, whether that is all borne out by the final decision of the tribunal, we will have to wait and see. We are still expecting some result sometime this evening.
All right, Simon Harris for now. Thank you. If we do get a verdict, we'll be right back to you. Thanks. Well, we've got some breaking news for you right now. Ken Livingstone is speaking. Let's go over to hear what he's saying.
Well, actually, he's just spoken, Lucrezia, and believe it or not, the hearing has not ended. It's been adjourned until next week, so we won't know until Tuesday now whether he's a member of the Labour Party or whether he's going to be expelled.
All right, Simon Harris, thank you.